The dawn of June 22nd, 1941, brought neither birds nor the tranquil sound of the countryside awakening. It brought a thunderous roar of steel. The earth trembled even before the sun had fully risen. Along a gigantic border stretching for thousands of kilometers, Nazi Germany launched the largest land invasion in history. Its name was Operation Barbarossa, and for the men of the Wehrmacht, it didn't seem like the beginning of a nightmare. It seemed like the start of an inevitable victory. Endless. Lines of panzer tanks cut through dirt roads, raising thick clouds of dust. Their steel tracks crushed fences, crops, and any obstacle in their path. Trucks loaded with infantry followed close behind, crammed with sweaty young soldiers, clutching rifles to their chests. Some laughing, others silent, but almost all with the same idea in mind. They would be home before Christmas. The propaganda had done its work. They said the Soviet Union was a weak giant, rotten inside, ready to collapse with a single push. In the sky, the roar of the engines never stopped. The Luftwaffe swept through the skies like a swarm of predators. Soviet planes were destroyed on the ground, catching fire on the runways before they even took off. Fuel depots exploded like miniature suns. Columns of black smoke rose so high they could be seen for miles. For the German soldiers advancing on the ground, this was proof that the enemy was already broken. The first Soviet villages appeared along the way. Wooden houses, barns, small churches with simple domes. Many were empty. Others had frightened inhabitants standing in their doorways, watching that grey-green tide of uniforms pass by like a flood of men and machines. The sound of boots marching in unison, the clinking of equipment, the metallic noise of weapons hitting belts created a constant, almost hypnotic rhythm. The war, at that moment, seemed organized, controlled, predictable. But death was already scattered across the ground. Soviet soldiers, caught off guard at border posts, lay fallen beside shallow trenches, some still clutching rifles that hadn't been fired. Horses, struck by shrapnel, writhed in the mud, neighing in pain until someone hastily ended their suffering with a short shot. The smell of gunpowder mixed with that of churned earth and fresh blood began to permeate the air everyone breathed, even if no one spoke of it. German officers consulted maps on the hoods of their vehicles, confidently pointing out routes. The arrows drawn on the paper indicated rapid advances, gigantic encirclements, important cities falling one after another. Everything followed the logic of blitzkrieg, the same that had crushed France. Speed, shock, destruction before the enemy could react. And in fact, in the first few days, it worked. Entire Soviet divisions were surrounded. Prisoners walked in long lines along the roads, dirty, exhausted, staring at the ground. But there was an almost invisible detail in that scene of absolute confidence, something that didn't appear on the maps nor in the orders shouted by the commanders. In the trucks, along with ammunition, dry bread and canned food, there weren't enough heavy coats. There weren't boots suitable for deep snow. Many soldiers carried only the standard campaign uniform, made for mild climates. Some had raincoats, others a light overcoat. Nothing that could withstand the Russian winter. But nobody thought about that. The summer was hot, the sun burned their necks, sweat ran down their backs. Talking about the cold seemed like a joke. With each kilometer gained, the feeling of invincibility grew. The Wehrmacht advanced as if the world ahead was just empty space waiting to be occupied. They didn't know, or didn't want to know, that they were running straight towards an enemy that didn't wear a uniform, didn't wield a rifle, and couldn't be bombed. For those men in that summer of 1941, the war still had the face of victory. Winter, silent and distant, was already on its way. Days pass, and what began as a quick offensive starts to transform into something much bigger than any ordinary soldier can see. On the general's map, the arrows continue advancing eastward, crossing wide rivers, dense forests, and seemingly endless fields. On the ground, however, the advance has weight, fatigue, the smell of fuel, and of men who haven't slept properly in weeks. The German columns stretch for miles and miles. At the front, tanks still fight their way through, crushing isolated resistance, pushing back disorganized Soviet units. But behind them comes a long, fragile trail. Supply trucks, ambulances, towed artillery, field kitchens, medical convoys. It's like a body with its arms stretched too far, while the rest lag behind, trying to keep up. Russian roads are not like those of Western Europe. Many are just strips of dirt track. When the weather is dry, they kick up thick dust that gets into your eyes, mouth, and weapons mechanisms. When it rains, they turn into heavy mud that swallows tires halfway. Trucks skid, engines roar under strain, soldiers get out to push stuck vehicles, their boots sinking with every step. Time that should be used to advance becomes time lost, fighting against the very ground. Each kilometre gained also means more distance between the front line and the supply depots. Fuel has to travel further. Food takes longer to arrive. Spare parts for broken tanks and trucks become scarce. A vehicle stopped on the side of the road ceases to be just a mechanical problem. It becomes a piece of combat power that disappears. The soldiers begin to feel it first in their stomachs and backs. Meals become smaller, more irregular. The bread hardens. The water isn't always clean. Sleep comes in short bursts, inside hastily dug holes or beside vehicles. The noise never completely stops. Engines, distant gunfire, occasional explosions. The body moves forward, but rest doesn't keep up. Meanwhile, the enemy does not disappear. Even in retreat, the Soviets leave behind destroyed bridges, torn up tracks and burned depots. Fields that could feed troops are burned. It is a retreat that takes everything with it, leaving only empty land. For the Germans, each captured city offers less than it promised. There are buildings, streets, but little fuel, little food, few intact resources. The forward units begin to become isolated for hours, sometimes days, until supplies can reach them. Ammunition needs to be carefully counted. Fuel is rationed. A tank may have enormous firepower, but without diesel it becomes just a metal shell lying in the field. Still, the order is to keep going. Always keep going. The feeling that victory is just around the corner, a little further ahead, pushes everyone forward. No one wants to be the unit that stops. No one wants to be the officer who asks to slow down. And so the Wehrmacht stretches itself further and further, thin as a thread pulled to its limit, advancing too deep into a country that seems to never end. At first, it's just a detail. Something some soldiers comment on quietly while rubbing their hands together in the morning. The air is no longer the same. That heavy summer heat begins to disappear, replaced by a dry chill that seeps into the sleeves of their uniforms and runs down their backs like invisible, icy water. It's not winter yet, but it's a warning that something is changing. The sky grows grayer, lower, as if pressing down on the earth. The rain comes. Unannounced. It's not a quick storm, it's days of pouring rain, soaking everything. Dirt roads that were already bad become traps. The mud grows, thick and sticky, clinging to boots, wheels and horse hooves. Every step requires strength. Every meter advanced is a struggle. The soldiers stop marching and begin to crawl. Trucks sink up to their axles. Heavy tanks, which once seemed like unstoppable monsters, are now stuck like insects in tar. The tracks spin, scattering mud everywhere, but the vehicle won't budge. Men get out, push, curse, get their faces and hands dirty, but the dirt won't budge. The Russian word they learn quickly is Rasputitsa, the mud station. It's not an enemy you can see or shoot. It's the ground itself, turning against whoever treads on it. Entire convoys are stuck for hours, sometimes days. The front line keeps asking for ammunition, food, fuel. Behind them, the trucks can't get through. The clothes are never dry. Wet socks inside the boots rub against the skin, causing sores. Feet swell and ache. The constant cold begins to bite at the toes, even though the temperature is still far from the worst. Soldiers wake up shivering, their uniforms clinging to their damp bodies. Some cough, some have a fever, but they keep walking because there is no other option. The equipment suffers as well. Weapons covered in mud malfunction. Bolts become heavy. Machine guns need constant cleaning in the rain with numb fingers. With each malfunction, a silent fear grows. What if, at the moment of attack, the rifle fails to fire? The surrounding fields seem endless, but they no longer possess the beauty of summer. They are dark, waterlogged patches, with abandoned vehicle carcasses littering the roadside, wheels sunken, doors ajar, as if they had been left in haste. Dead horses swell at the roadside, drowned in mud or broken from exhaustion. The smell begins to change. Less dust, more decay. Even so, the orders remain the same. Go forward. Only now the advance is slow, arduous, exhausting. The rhythm of the blitzkrieg breaks down. What was once speed is now brute force. And deep down, without many admitting it, an uncomfortable feeling arises. If it's already like this now, what will happen when the real cold arrives? This is the first whisper of hell. It's not yet the white storm, but it's the ground warning that this land will not be conquered without exacting a high price, paid in blood, flesh, and human resistance pushed to the limit. Then, almost. Overnight, the warning becomes a sentence. The cold that was once bothersome transforms into something alive, aggressive, like an enemy that attacks silently. The temperature plummets below zero and continues to fall as if there were no bottom. 10 degrees below zero, 20, 30. The air that enters the lungs burns from the inside as if each breath brought small crystals cutting the throat. The landscape changes color. The brown of the mud disappears under a white layer that grows deeper. Each night, snow covers roads, fields, abandoned vehicles, bodies that no one managed to bury. The world becomes strangely silent, as if sound were swallowed by the ice. But beneath this silence, there is suffering. The engines start to die first. Trucks that were running the day before won't start in the morning. The oil inside them thickens like grease. Batteries discharge too quickly. Soldiers light fires under the engines, trying to heat the metal to get them running. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. Essential vehicles are left behind, frozen in place. Weapons feel it too. The metal is so cold it burns the skin on contact. Soldiers try to fire, but the mechanism won't move. Bolts jam, machine guns seize up after just a few shots. They have to be disassembled, cleaned, and hot steam blown from their own mouths onto the parts. But human warmth isn't enough against that merciless cold. Men suddenly begin to look old. Beards grow, covered in ice crystals formed by the vapor of their breath. Eyelashes freeze, noses turn red, then white, then completely colorless. Fingers lose feeling. First they tingle, then they ache, then they feel nothing at all, and that's when the real danger begins. At night, the cold is worse. Soldiers huddle in shallow holes in the snow, sharing thin blankets, trying to share the little warmth their bodies still produce. Some don't wake up. In the morning, comrades shake, call each other's names, but the man next to them is stiff, his face calm, covered by a thin layer of ice. There was no gunfire, no explosion, just the cold, working silently. Uniforms made for other seasons are insufficient. Fabrics stiffen. Boots don't insulate enough. Wet socks become cold blades enveloping the feet. Every step is painful. Every hour standing still is a risk of never being able to move again. Even simple tasks, like buttoning a button or tying something, become difficult when the fingers won't obey. And yet, the war doesn't stop. There are gunshots on the horizon, explosions muffled by the snow. But now, for many Wehrmacht soldiers, the greatest enemy isn't in the rifle's sights. It's in the air they breathe, the ground they walk on, the very metal they carry. General Winter has taken command of the battlefield, and he accepts no surrender, takes no prisoners, shows no hurry. He simply continues, hour after hour, draining strength, warmth, and life. On paper, the German army was an organized machine, each man with his equipment, each piece designed for modern warfare. But there, in the icy heart of Russia, this organization begins to seem like a cruel joke. The uniform that once protected from the light summer breeze is now almost a decorative piece of cloth in the face of a cold that cuts like a knife. The jackets are too thin. The pants don't keep out the wind, which pierces the fabric and hits the skin like icy needles. The boots, made for long marches in moderate weather, don't insulate against the frozen ground. Snow seeps in through the edges, melts a little with body heat, and then freezes again, turning the inside of the boot into a hard shell of ice around the feet. The soldiers improvise as best they can. They wrap newspapers around their torsos, stuff paper inside their boots, tie tattered rags to their hands under their worn-out gloves. Some take curtains from abandoned houses, pieces of old blankets, any fabric they can find. Military discipline still exists, but now survival comes first. Appearance ceases to matter. What matters is enduring another night. The cold doesn't hurt all the time. That's the danger. First comes the burning sensation, then the sharp, throbbing pain. But if a person is exposed for too long, the pain goes away. The fingers become stiff, pale, and numb. Many think it's gotten better. It hasn't. It's frostbite progressing. The skin begins to die without the person even realizing it. In the makeshift medical posts, the scene repeats itself. Men sit trembling, while doctors examine swollen dark feet, some already with black spots. The smell changes. It's not just sweat and dirt, it's flesh beginning to rot, still attached to the body. Knives and saws appear, clenched teeth, muffled screams, arms holding shoulders to prevent the patient from moving. Toes, sometimes entire feet, are removed right there, because leaving them is worse. Faces suffer too. Noses, ears, cheeks exposed to the freezing wind turn whitish, then bluish. Some men develop open wounds on their faces, cracks that bleed and freeze almost simultaneously. Talking hurts, eating hurts, breathing hurts. Even so, the orders don't change. Guards remain in position, motionless for hours, trying not to tap their feet or rub their hands too often, so as not to attract the enemy's attention. Snipers try to aim with stiff fingers, almost incapable of pulling the trigger accurately. Every simple task becomes an enormous effort. The uniform, which should be the soldier's second skin, becomes a constant reminder that something was underestimated. They came prepared to fight against men. They didn't come prepared to fight against a climate that tears pieces from the body without firing a single shot. And, as the cold continues to bite, it becomes clear that many will not fall to bullets or shrapnel. They will fall slowly devoured by an invisible enemy that dresses the world in white. And then comes the storm, not like a strong wind or a beautiful snowfall of a European winter, but like a white wall that swallows everything that exists. The sky and the earth cease to be separate things. Everything becomes the same color, the same emptiness, the same biting cold. The snow doesn't fall in light flakes. It's hurled by the wind, hitting your face like frozen sand. Within minutes, visibility vanishes. A soldier can barely see his comrade a few steps away. Shapes become shadows, then nothing. The entire world shrinks to a small circle around each man, and even that circle is in constant motion, swirling, confusing the senses. Columns on the march become disorganized. Shouted orders are carried away by the wind before reaching anyone's ear. Vehicle engines are muffled by the constant howl of the blizzard. Men get lost simply by walking the wrong way for a few seconds. One step off the marked trail and the direction disappears. North, south, east, west. Everything seems the same. The snow covers tracks almost the instant they are made. A group passing through an area leaves marks that disappear as if they had never been there. Patrols go out to reconnoiter the terrain and don't return, not because they were attacked, but because the world around them has been erased, as if someone had turned the page. The soldiers try to protect their faces with makeshift scarves, but the fabric freezes hard, sticking to their skin. The wind finds any opening, between buttons, under the helmet, inside the sleeves. The sensation is of being scraped alive, layer by layer, by the cold. Vehicles stop not because they've run out of fuel, but because the drivers simply can no longer see the road. Trucks are lined up along the highway, forming silent rows of ice-covered metal. Some men try to walk from one vehicle to another and disappear between them, swallowed by the white curtain. Within this storm, time also gets lost. Minutes seem like hours. The effort to walk a few meters is so great that the body burns energy too quickly. Breathing becomes heavy, forming clouds that freeze on eyelashes and eyebrows. Many stop for a moment just to catch their breath. Some never get up again. The battlefield ceases to have lines, positions, front and rear. There is only immediate survival. The human enemy is almost invisible, but its presence is felt in the constant tension. Any shadow could be a Soviet soldier emerging from the snow. But the greatest enemy there is the environment itself, which erases paths, sounds and lives without leaving a trace. When the blizzard finally subsides, the world that reappears is not the same. Where there were men, now there are white mounds with strange shapes beneath. Where there were trails, there is only smooth surface. The storm not only made the war more difficult, it erased parts of it, taking soldiers, equipment and hope into a frozen silence from which many would never return. The Soviet counterattack erupts like a silent and relentless avalanche, a final judgment pronounced by the very land the Germans thought they had conquered. When the blizzard, for a merciful moment, thins out and allows the eye to see beyond a few meters of suffocating white, the relief the Wehrmacht soldiers longed for does not arrive. Instead, terror emerges in human, or almost human, form. Shadows detach themselves from the icy horizon, indistinct shapes that seem to spring from the snow itself, as if the Russian winter had spawned its own vengeful specters. Dressed in white capes that blend them into the landscape, the Soviet soldiers advance on skis, gliding with a ghostly, almost inaudible fluidity. The screech of blades on the frozen crust is the only harbinger, a whisper barely distinguishable from the wind. They do not march, they flow. They know every depression, every ravine hidden beneath the snow, every trail that the cold has solidified into secret paths. For them, winter is not an enemy. It is armor, it is disguise, it is an ancient ally that returns to the invaders the price of their arrogance. The first impact is a betrayal of the senses. The oppressive silence of the steppe is torn apart by dry gunshots, echoes that seem to come from all sides at once. Bullets pierce the tarpaulins of paralyzed trucks, pierce bodies still bent over engines that refuse to start, and bring down sentries whose fingers, stiff as dead branches, can barely close on the trigger. The surprise is absolute, overwhelming. Men who have spent weeks fighting the cold now discover that the true horror was not the freezing of their bones, but the sudden arrival of an enemy that seems immune to it. Behind the spectral infantry come the T-34s, steel monsters that roar with a grave and inexorable determination. Their diesel engines, designed to withstand the brutal cold, do not hesitate like the German Maybachs, which die suffocated by frozen oil. The wide tracks devour the deep snow without sinking, transforming what for the panzers was a treacherous swamp into a firm road. The 76mm cannons vomit orange fire against positions that barely manage to mount a response. Explosions muffled by the snow echo like submerged thunder, launching geysers of crystals and frozen earth. The Germans try to fight back, but every gesture is agony. Numb limbs move with nightmarish slowness. Rifles are drawn with effort. Sights tremble in hands that barely feel the metal. Some manage to fire once or twice before the bolt jams again, the mechanism contracting like muscles suffering a deadly cramp. MG-34 machine guns, once the pride of German engineering, refuse to unleash their life-saving bursts. The bolts seize, the firing pins break with dry cracks that sound like bones breaking. Officers' shouts are lost in the wind, orders dissolve into unintelligible despair as the lines crumble into isolated fragments. Small groups of cornered men fighting by instinct, not knowing if there is a flank, a rear, or just the white void around them. Communication dies along with hope. Telephone wires become ropes of brittle ice. Radios emit only static or silence, their batteries exhausted by the relentless cold. Each company, each platoon, becomes an island besieged in a sea of snow. There are no reinforcements. There is no organized retreat. Only blind fighting, hand-to-hand combat when the enemy gets too close. Bayonets against bayonets, fists against frost-covered faces, panting breaths that condense into white clouds and disappear like ghosts. The contrast is soul-wrenching. On one side, hunched figures, wrapped in makeshift rags. Newspapers stuffed inside their tunics, blankets stolen from peasants, anything that retains a shred of warmth. Their faces blackened by incipient gangrene, their sunken eyes the scent of those who have seen comrades freeze on their feet. On the other, almost ethereal forms, moving with predatory confidence, exploring every undulation of the terrain as if the landscape belonged to them by divine right. The snow, which for the Germans is an endless shroud, devoid of meaning for the Soviets, is a protective cloak, perfect camouflage, an invisible path. The wounded fall, and the vivid red of their blood contrasts obscenely with the absolute white, spreading into puddles that freeze in minutes, forming grotesque sculptures of solidified agony. Some crawl, leaving trails that new flakes soon erase, as if the earth were devouring them alive. Others remain motionless, the vapor of their breath ceasing suddenly, their still warm bodies betraying their last sigh before the cold claims them entirely. The battlefield becomes a frozen slaughterhouse where the fire of explosions and the steel of projectiles fight against the cold that kills more slowly but with equal cruelty. And the worst part isn't death itself, it's the revelation it brings. For the first time, the German soldier understands, with a clarity that burns more than any wound, that winter doesn't punish them equally. While he fights against the weather and against the enemy, the Red Army has made winter its most lethal weapon. The illusion of technical superiority crumbles. The belief in the invincibility of the blitzkrieg evaporates like breath in the frigid air. They are no longer advancing into hostile territory. They are trapped within it, swallowed by a vastness that hates them and crushes them with cosmic indifference. In the heart of this white inferno, weapons, once proud extensions of the German will, become dead weight, metallic betrayal. The Kar 98K rifle, a symbol of Teutonic precision, refuses to obey. The trigger grinds in vain, the bolt jams as if the metal had sworn allegiance to the Russian cold. Soldiers pound on the breech with numb hands, blow hot air that condenses into instant ice, try to warm the mechanism against their chests, as if they could breathe life into a steel corpse. Some manage a solitary, weak shot before the mechanism freezes again. Every second spent in this futile struggle is another second that the enemy advances, invisible and inexorable. The machine guns, meant to sweep away the Soviet advance, fall silent. The gunner pulls the trigger and hears only the dry click of betrayal or a single muffled bang followed by deadly silence. The oil hardened like resin, the springs compressed to the point of rupture, the firing pins shattered by the cold. Everything conspires against them. Grenades slip from numb fingers, rolling inertly in the snow. Pistols remain stuck in frozen holsters, as if the leather had fused to the flesh. Even the sights, covered in ice from panting breath, turn the target into an indistinct blur. When bullets fail, combat regresses to primal brutality. Bayonets glint briefly before sinking into flesh. Gloved fists pound faces masked in white. Bodies collide in the soft snow with animal grunts. There is the damp sound of blades tearing fabric and skin, the cracking of bones under heavy boots, the ragged breath of men who know that each blow could be their last. And always, looming over everything, the cold that devours the fallen, that turns sweat into crusts of ice, that steals body heat faster than any hemorrhage. Trust shatters like glass under a hammer. The soldier, trained to believe in the superiority of German technology, looks at his weapon as if it were a hostile stranger. It weighs heavily in his trembling hands, too cold, too useless. The terror comes not only from the advancing enemy, it comes from the realization that the material world has turned against him. Courage is not enough. Discipline is not enough. The metal must allow it, and the metal denies it. In that instant of absolute despair, when the white figure emerges from swirling snow and the rifle remains silent, the man understands the abyss. He is naked before death, unarmed in the heart of an unforgiving hell. The blizzard returns, covering the bodies, erasing trails, burying evidence. But within the survivors, the mark remains, a wound in the soul that no future thaw can heal. The Russian winter didn't just kill men, it killed the illusion that human will can bend nature. And in that icy silence, between the howling wind and the groans of the wounded, echoes the most terrifying truth. They are not conquerors. They are prey, trapped in a white and endless snare, where each snowflake is another nail in the coffin of hope. After the roar of gunfire echoes and dissolves into the icy air, like a final gasp of human fury, the silence that settles is not one of peace, but of a predatory calm, where the true master of those endless lands reassumes his throne. The cold, patient and omnipresent once again envelops everything with its invisible tentacles, as if it had only granted a pause to the chaos of battle so that men could fully appreciate the horror it holds. The Wehrmacht soldiers, panting and trembling, raise their eyes to the white horizon, searching for traces of the enemy that retreated like ghosts in a blizzard. But what they find are not distant silhouettes of Soviet uniforms. They are the familiar faces of comrades, now transfigured into masks of silent agony, victims of an adversary that does not shoot, does not bleed, does not scream. It only consumes. Night descends like a heavy shroud, the sky darkening to an absolute blackness sprinkled with indifferent stars, which seem mocking in their cosmic coldness. The men huddle in makeshift shelters, hastily dug in the snow hardened like frozen concrete, shallow ditches that barely protect from the biting wind, holes that smell of damp earth and accumulated fear. They huddle together, bodies pressed against each other in a forced intimacy, sharing worn and torn blankets that look more like tattered rags of a defeated flag. The warmth they emanate is scarce, fleeting, stolen by each gust of wind that howls like ancestral wolves, seeping through the gaps in their inadequate clothing, through the seams that the cold has cracked like dry skin. Whispered conversations echo softly, desperate attempts to maintain vigilance, stories of distant homes, weak jokes that die in the icy air, murmured orders for no one to close their eyes for too long. Because the freezing doesn't announce its arrival with fanfare, it insinuates itself like a treacherous seducer, disguised as irresistible fatigue, a lassitude that invades the limbs, an overwhelming desire to surrender to sleep, to cease the incessant trembling, to rest just a moment. The body, exhausted by endless marches, battles and privations, betrays the spirit. Breathing becomes shallow like gentle waves on a frozen lake. The heart, once a war drum, slows to a languid, almost inaudible pulse. Beside you, a companion may not notice. He himself struggles against the same inner demon, his eyes heavy as molten lead. In the morning, when the pale and merciless sun rises, revealing an even whiter and more hostile world, the scene unfolds with a cruelty that crushes the soul. A soldier shakes his friend's shoulder, calls his name in a hoarse, insistent voice. But the body remains rigid, like a statue carved from eternal ice. The face, pale as the surrounding snow, is covered by a thin layer of crystals that gleam treacherously in the rising sun. The lips, bluish and cracked, seem frozen in a last inaudible whisper. There is no visible wound, no pool of scarlet blood to witness the violence, only absolute emptiness, the subtle theft of a life by the cold that penetrates the pores, the bones, the core of existence. The dead man did not fall in glory. He simply extinguished himself like a flame exposed to the Arctic wind. The survivors bear the marks of this invisible war, scars that form even before death. Toes darken, turning black as coal, the skin hardening into a dead husk that doesn't respond to touch. Inside, soaked and frozen boots, feet lose feeling, making each step a painful guess. Are they still there, or has the cold already claimed them? When, in rare moments of respite, a man risks removing his footwear, the air fills with a nauseating heavy stench of decaying flesh, of gangrene, advancing like a biblical plague. The fear of amputation hangs like an invisible guillotine. Losing a limb means not only excruciating pain, but the end of usefulness as a soldier. Abandonment in some distant field hospital, or worse, being left behind in an evacuation that may never come. Many mask the agony, biting their lips until they bleed, to remain with their unit, the only shred of camaraderie in a world that devours them. The hands, essential tools for survival, also succumb. Fingers as stiff as dry twigs do not bend to command, making the simple act of holding a rifle torture. Some tie the weapon to their wrist with makeshift ropes, fearing it will slip from weak grips, falling into the snow to be swallowed forever. Cracks in the skin open like fissures in dry earth, bleeding drops that freeze instantly, forming dark, irregular scabs on the knuckles, wrists and palms. Every movement is a sharp blade against exposed flesh, a constant reminder that the body is fragile, ephemeral. Faces transform into masks of eternal suffering. Eyes sunken into dark sockets, cheeks furrowed by wind cuts that burn like acid, expressions hardened into a rigidity that mirrors the surrounding ice. The cold attacks not only the flesh, it corrodes the mind, planting seeds of dread that flourish in the darkness of night. Each sunset brings the terror of not waking, of becoming just another motionless form in the snow. Each dawn is a macabre count. Who is missing? Who has gone without a word? The weight of this absence accumulates like snow in an imminent avalanche, more oppressive than any burden on one's back. At this stage of the war, the conflict transcends bullets and explosions. It becomes an internal battle, where the soldier is the battlefield, and the enemy attacks from both outside and within simultaneously. The cold seeps into the lungs, burning like icy fire with each breath. It steals vital heat, leaving the body like an empty shell. The terror of frostbite lies in this duality. It does not kill with merciful swiftness, but with deliberate slowness, transforming men into shadows of themselves, forcing them to witness their own dissolution. It is the despair of fighting an invincible adversary, one that cannot be shot, cannot be negotiated with, only endured, until endurance becomes impossible. And while the cold devours bodies from the outside, another plague rages from within. Hunger, voracious and insatiable, transforming the white hell into an abyss of absolute emptiness. The cold consumes energy incessantly, even in forced immobility. The body, in a desperate struggle to keep the inner fire burning, consumes reserves that no longer exist. Each involuntary tremor, each heartbeat accelerated by terror, demands fuel that dwindling rations do not provide. The stomach contracts in painful spasms, a void that roars in the silence of the icy night, echoing like a primordial lament. The supply trains, already plagued by the autumn mud that bogged them down and the snow that buried them, now fail catastrophically. Trucks sink into drifts in deep snow, engines won't start in the extreme cold, roads dissolve into invisible trails. Supply lines, stretched beyond human limits, snap like fragile wires. On the front lines, soldiers count crumbs, dividing portions that would barely sustain a child. A chunk of bread as hard as a rock, which must be broken with rifle butts or clenched teeth. a watery soup, more melted snow tinged with color than substance, sipped cautiously so as not to burn their parched mouths. Improvisations arise from pure desperation. Fallen horses, killed by enemy bullets or collapsed from exhaustion under the weight of cannons and ammunition, become macabre sources of sustenance. The meat, stiff and frozen, is cut with knives that slip from trembling hands, chunks torn away with Herculean effort. When there is scarce firewood for a flickering fire, it is cooked in makeshift cauldrons, the sweet metallic smell of blood mingling with the lingering odor of gunpowder, rancid sweat, and incipient decomposition. Without fire, it is eaten raw, chewing tough fibers that stick to the throat, swallowing with bile and grim determination. In abandoned, looted and burned villages, men rummage through dark cellars in search of scraps, potatoes frozen like stones, grains scattered on the dirty ground, withered roots that barely yield to the teeth. Some boil strips of leather from harnesses and belts, softening them in scalding water to extract a tasteless broth, chewing for hours on something that has more texture than flavor, as if they could deceive the stomach with the illusion of food. Water, essential and treacherous, is another torment. Rivers solidified into impenetrable blocks, puddles transformed into mirrors of ice. Snow is melted in rusty cans and crushed helmets, but it carries impurities, earth, ashes from distant fires, remnants of battles that turn each sip into a game of Russian roulette with disease. Hunger reshapes souls. Conversations, once about tactics or memories of home, now obsessively revolve around food. Vivid descriptions of past feasts, aromas of warm bread, flavors of roasted meats that emerge as torturous visions. Humor evaporates, replaced by sharp irritability. Fights erupt over a crust of bread, ending in guilty silences and empty stares. The body visibly weakens. Marches become ordeals, each step a victory over weakness. Equipment weighs like anchors. Recovery from a banal effort stretches for hours. Wounds, small or serious, refuse to heal, festering into pustules that the cold aggravates. Diseases, dysentery, scurvy, pneumonia, find fertile ground in weakened organisms, reaping lives with the same efficiency as the enemy. In the heart of this white hell, where cold steals warmth, war steals blood, and hunger steals essence, despair settles in like a slow poison. Each day survived is an exhausted miracle, a temporary extension of an existence that seems futile. The terrifying realization grows. It doesn't take a bullet to annihilate a man there. Relentless time, corrosive cold, and an empty stomach that echoes like a bottomless abyss are enough. The soldiers, once proud warriors, are reduced to hungry shadows, trapped in a vastness that crushes them not with brute force, but with the cruel indifference of nature. And in this white void, the terror is not imminent death. It is the understanding that the struggle is futile, that the end will come not in glory, but in a chilling whisper, forgotten beneath layers of eternal snow. In the vast, merciless white expanse of the Russian steppe, where the horizon merges with the sky in a suffocating monotony of eternal snow, dark, motionless silhouettes emerge, like relics of a prehistoric era buried beneath layers of ancient ice. These are abandoned vehicles, once invincible panzer tanks, Opel and Mercedes, trucks that carried the weight of imperial ambition. Park and flak cannons towed by exhausted horses, now transformed into metallic skeletons scattered across the landscape like the bones of a colossal leviathan that succumbed to the deadly embrace of winter. These machines, which roared with the thunder of engines and the crash of tracks, advancing like a tide of steel and fire, now lie paralyzed forever, covered by blankets of translucent ice that transform them into grotesque sculptures. Silent witnesses to the collapse of a war that considered itself immortal. At the dawn of this catastrophe, each immobilized vehicle represents a desperate battle against the inevitable. Drivers, their faces blackened by soot and cold, lift rusty hoods with trembling hands, exposing mechanical entrails that the ice has claimed as its own. Mechanics, wrapped in makeshift rags, pound on engine blocks with tools that slip from numb fingers, producing metallic echoes lost in the howling wind. Small fires are lit beneath the chassis, feeble flames fueled by rags soaked in residual fuel, in the vain hope of melting the oil that has solidified into a viscous mass, or of thawing pipes that have cracked like veins exposed to the frigid air. The men's breath comes out in heavy clouds, condensing into crystals that cling to their hardened beards, while they murmur curses in hoarse German, their eyes bloodshot with fatigue and frustration. But often the effort is futile. The engine coughs once, sputters, and dies in final silence. The fuel, thickened by the 40-degree cold, refuses to flow. The batteries, drained by the relentless temperature, produce no spark. The gears, constricted by the shrinking metal, lock up like arthritic joints. When the inexorable order to proceed echoes along the line, there is no mercy for the fallen. Soldiers, with heavy backpacks and rifles slung over their shoulders, loot what they can from the wreckage. Rusty ammunition boxes, mouldy blankets that still retain a vestige of human warmth, cans of preserved meat forgotten in dark corners, or even spare parts that could save another vehicle further on. They look back at the abandoned tank or truck with a gaze that mixes guilt and resignation, as if they were leaving a wounded comrade to bleed in the snow, knowing that staying would mean sharing the same fate. Abandonment is a wound to the soul. These machines were not mere instruments, they were extensions of the Teutonic will, symbols of technological superiority that promised swift victory. Now they become discarded burdens, left to rot in the white void. The tanks, war monsters like the Panzer III and I-4, with their 75mm cannons capable of pulverizing Soviet fortifications from a distance, become inert carcasses in the middle of nowhere. Some lie precariously tilted on the edge of makeshift roads, broken tracks hanging like mutilated limbs. Others sink halfway into the hardened snow like shipwrecks in a frozen sea. The camouflage paint, olive green and grey, begins to peel off in irregular flakes, revealing bare metal that burns the skin to the touch, sticking to the unwary tongue like an icy trap. Inside the turrets, control panels are covered in frost, levers are immobile in their final positions, and the persistent smell of oil and gunpowder mixes with the stench of decomposition. Perhaps a frozen rat, or worse, traces of a crew member who couldn't get out. Trucks form silent, ghostly lines along disrupted supply routes, their wheels buried in snowdrifts that anchor them like deep roots. Swinging doors sway in the wind, seats covered in a layer of ice that gleams like fake diamonds under the weak sun. Inside, remnants of a hurried departure tell silent stories. A cracked leather glove forgotten on the seat, an empty lunchbox with crusts of frozen soup, a Stahlhelm helmet thrown on the floor, its strap broken. These artifacts evoke the panic of the moment, a man summoned by an urgent order or fleeing the Soviet advance that approached like a devouring shadow, leaving behind fragments of his precarious existence. These abandoned vehicles, scattered across the vast expanse, transcend mere material waste. They become somber landmarks in a landscape devoid of reference points. In a world where the infinite white swallows directions and distances, soldiers use them as makeshift compasses. After the burnt-out truck, with its body twisted like charred bones, turn right to the command post. The makeshift shelter is near the trackless tank, where the turret still points east like an accusing finger. Dead machines become points of orientation for men navigating the chaos, transforming the mechanical graveyard into a living map of survival. But the psychological weight is crushing, an anchor dragging the spirit toward the abyss. Each vehicle left behind is a monument to failure, an irrefutable sign that the Blitzkrieg, the lightning war that swept across Europe with speed and precision is dissolving into the Russian ice. The advance that depended on ceaseless movement, on motorized columns devouring kilometers in hours, now leaves a trail of wreckage marking the point where the tide has turned. The soldiers, marching alongside these steel ghosts, feel despair growing like an internal frost. What will happen when the last tanks stop? When supplies don't arrive because there are no vehicles to transport them? The army that invaded the Soviet Union as a modern, mechanized force, equipped with the best of German engineering, now sows the path with dead metal, as if winter were dismantling, piece by piece, the gears of the war machine, revealing its fragility before the elemental fury of nature. For the Soviet enemy, these remains are macabre gifts, makeshift shelters against the wind, metal sources for repairs, or traps for ambushes. For the Germans, they are chilling reminders that not even the most devastating firepower can withstand the embrace of General Winter. In the midst of the endless white, these still shadows whisper a terrifying truth. Here is where the advance stalled, where force became dead weight, where the war began to be lost not only to armed men, but to the inexorable cold that knows no surrender, that devours empires with the patience of geological eras. Even in the face of this disintegration, in the face of the cold that crushes bones and souls, in the face of the hunger that corrodes entrails and the loss that accumulates bodies like snowdrifts, the order that descends through the chain of command is a sharp and merciless blade. Hold position. Do not retreat. Hold the ground at any cost, as if the frozen ground were a sacred trophy that cannot be surrendered. For the officers on the front line, exhausted and hardened, this echoes not as a brilliant strategy from distant headquarters, warmed by campfires and maps, but as a death sentence pronounced by an invisible leader whose will prevails over brutal reality. The Wehrmacht units, already battered by months of incessant fighting, freeze in precarious positions. Razed villages whose burnt wooden houses offer partial shelter, sparse woods where skeletal trees barely protect from the biting wind, makeshift defensive lines dug into snow that has solidified like granite. The trenches are not excavations in soft, welcoming earth. They are shallow furrows dug with shovels that squeak against the hardened ground, each blow an agony of protesting muscles and tools that break with dry cracks. Sometimes feeble fires are lit on the ground to soften the topsoil, flames that dance timidly before being extinguished by the cold, leaving only cold ashes and an illusion of progress. The men dig on their knees, faces reddened by the effort, sweat that freezes instantly into salty crusts, creating fortifications that look more like shallow graves than robust defenses. The Soviet enemy presses on with renewed fury, attacks coming in inexorable waves, like the sea crashing against eroded cliffs. Infantry in white cloaks tests weak points, cuts vital roads with surgical precision, encircles advanced positions that become besieged islands in the white ocean. And the Germans, even as the encirclement closes around them, even as the horizon fills with enemy silhouettes, are not allowed to retreat to safer lines, to regroup and lick their wounds. They remain anchored, waiting for reinforcements that are delayed on blocked roads, or simply evaporate in empty promises. The siege materializes on multiple fronts, pockets of troops isolated like air bubbles in thick ice, surrounded by the infinite void. Ammunition is rationed with obsessive precision, each shot counted as a coin of life. The wounded pile up in makeshift shelters, half-ruined barns, ditches covered with torn tarpaulins, groaning softly amidst the crackling ice, covered by thin blankets that barely retain the fleeting warmth of decaying bodies. Doctors, with empty kits and hands trembling from cold and fatigue, work by the light of weak lanterns, amputating gangrenous limbs with saws that creak against bone, applying soaked bandages to wounds that refuse to close in the frigid air. The smell of antiseptic mixed with pus and decomposition hangs heavy, a perfume of imminent death. The feeling of being trapped grows like an internal blizzard, suffocating the spirit. Retreat routes are under constant enemy fire, or have simply vanished beneath layers of deep snow, making any movement a game of Russian roulette with annihilation. Radio messages crackle short and fragmented, interrupted by technical failures, dead batteries, frozen antennas, sending desperate pleas for permission to retreat. The answer, when it arrives, is a dry, absolute no, echoing like a final verdict. Resist, endure, as if stubbornness could bend winter, as if discipline could conjure supplies from thin air. For ordinary soldiers, this means confronting not only the visible enemy ahead, with its roaring T-34s and spectral infantry, but time itself, an invisible adversary that corrodes day by day, hour by hour. Each dawn brings more bone-chilling cold, more hunger that devours the insides, more bodies that do not rise from their positions, rigid as ice statues. Some men, leaning against makeshift barricades, look at the white horizon and understand, with a clarity that burns like acid, that even without defeat in open battle, they are being slowly consumed, dissolved, by the hostile vastness. Despair settles like frost in their lungs. Why fight for a piece of frozen land when the very air conspires against them? Still, in a testament to human resilience or the madness of obedience, many persist. They build defenses with sandbags that freeze into solid blocks, scraps of wood torn from incinerated villages, parts of destroyed vehicles that serve as makeshift walls. They fire sparingly, each bullet a silent prayer. They conserve their strength for the next assault, knowing that the line is thinning like a hair under tension. Discipline, forged in years of training, holds the front, but it is a fragile front, cracked like ice on a river about to collapse. The order not to retreat transforms the war into an epic of pure resistance, where conquering ground gives way to simply not being wiped out. Each position held costs, not only bullets and blood, but frozen fingers, amputated feet, entire lives evaporated in the frigid air. These isolated positions, scattered across the white ocean like islands of suffering, become microcosms of agony, soldiers huddled in holes that smell of frozen urine and fear, vigilant eyes staring into nothingness, hearts pounding with the certainty that they are at the limit of human endurance. And while the Russian winter shows no sign of mercy, continuing its inexorable march of frost and blizzards, each man there knows, in the depths of his shattered soul, that he is holding onto the ground not for victory, but for a stubbornness bordering on suicide, on the edge of the abyss where hope dissolves into infinite whiteness, leaving only the distant echo of a war lost to the eternal cold. Amidst the chaos, something even more disturbing than the noise of combat or the silence of the cold begins. Men simply cease to exist. There is no explosion, no long scream, no clear witness. A soldier is there 1 hour, and the next, he's gone. Patrols are sent out to scout the terrain, make contact with neighboring units, or find supply routes. They set out in small groups, dark figures against the endless white. The wind blows, the snow begins to fall again, and the silhouettes become blurred, swallowed by the landscape. Sometimes, the last thing you see is an arm raising, a quick gesture, then nothing. The snow covers footprints almost the instant they are made. Trails disappear. A man who moves a few meters away to look for shelter, wood, or even to relieve himself, can lose his way. The white sky blends with the white ground. There are no points of reference. He walks thinking he is returning, but he is moving away. Some are found hours later, fallen, bent over as if trying to protect themselves from the wind. Others are never found. The war there creates a kind of death without a body, without farewell. Comrades ask, officers check lists, but the answer is always the same: missing. The fear of this corrodes the mind. It's not just the danger of being shot, it's the risk of being swallowed up by the environment, of disappearing without a trace, as if you'd never been there. Soldiers move in pairs whenever possible, tie ropes together during heavy storms, and shout names from time to maintain contact. But even these precautions fail. A stronger gust of wind, a misstep in an area of snow that's too soft, a fall into a hidden hole, and the man is gone. The cold does the rest quickly. There are also the disappearances after the fighting. Wounded soldiers who try to crawl behind the line, seeking shelter, but lose their strength along the way. The snow that falls during the night covers their bodies. In the morning, the terrain seems smooth, untouched, as if nothing had happened there. This kind of loss weighs differently. There's no funeral, no last glimpse of a face, only absence, an empty place in the row, a name that doesn't answer the roll call. And in the midst of the white hell, this absence is yet another reminder that there, war doesn't just kill, it erases. As the weeks go by, the organized structure that supported the army begins to crack. What were once well-defined fronts, clear sectors, and functioning chains of command now become a confusing tangle of isolated units trying to survive on their own. Communications are failing more and more frequently. Radios don't work properly in the extreme cold. Batteries die quickly. Telephone wires freeze or are broken by bombings and the desperate movement of the troops themselves. Orders arrive late, incomplete, or simply don't arrive at all. Officers make decisions without knowing what is happening just a few kilometers away. Units believing they have neighbors protecting their flanks discover too late that these positions have been abandoned, destroyed, or surrounded. Gaps appear in the line like cracks in a window about to shatter. Through these spaces, Soviet forces infiltrate, attacking from unexpected sides, cutting roads and escape routes. Exhausted soldiers defend positions that no longer have strategic importance, simply because they haven't received new orders. Others retreat without coordination, trying to escape encirclements they didn't even know existed. Groups mingle. Men from different units, without known officers, coming together out of necessity, not by plan. Hierarchy weakens under the weight of chaos. Some commanders still maintain rigid discipline, trying to impose order amidst the collapse. Others can barely keep their own men standing, physically and mentally. Organized warfare gives way to a fragmented struggle, sector by sector, shelter by shelter. The battlefield transforms into a mosaic of small, isolated battles. One group holds a ruined village, another resists along a line of trees covered in ice, another tries to fight its way through a road under constant fire. There is no overall view, only the urgency of the moment. For the soldiers, this means a growing sense of abandonment. They fight, they suffer, they freeze, but they know. Longer know if they are part of a larger plan or just delaying the inevitable. Trust in the war machine begins to crumble, replaced by pure survival instinct. The collapse of the lines is not a sudden explosion, but a slow one. Like ice cracking beneath their feet without warning, the structure gives way until each man realizes that the battlefront, as it once existed, has practically ceased to exist. What remains are pockets of resistance scattered across a white desert, and the feeling that the war there has lost any clear form, becoming merely desperate resistance against a destiny closing in around them. And then, after so much noise, so much wind, so many gunshots, comes a silence that weighs more than anything that came before. It's not peace. It's the silence of something that has been crushed. The storm weakens, the sky clears on a few rare days, and the landscape is revealed in a cold, pale light. What appears is not a field of victory, but an open graveyard. The snow, once swirling in the air, now rests like a thick sheet on the earth, and on what remains of it. Abandoned vehicles dot the horizon, dark shadows trapped in the ice. Cannons point nowhere. Trucks are tilted, half buried. Tanks look like dead creatures, frozen in mid-morning. No engines are running, no voices around them, only the light wind passing between steel carcasses. Bodies begin to be found when the snow shifts or when someone stumbles on something too hard to be stone. Men huddled together, arms close to their chests, as if still trying to keep warm. Others lying on their sides, their faces calm, almost serene, as if they had simply fallen asleep. Stiff uniforms, covered in ice, weapons still clutched in their hands. The survivors walked slowly through this scene, recognizing pieces of their own stories scattered on the ground. A familiar helmet, a coat that once belonged to a friend, a position where voices once roared, now occupied only by silence and frozen marks of combat. There is no celebration. There is no sense of mission accomplished, only profound exhaustion and the understanding of something that can no longer be ignored. The Blitzkrieg, that swift and confident offensive that crossed the border months before, died there under the Russian snow. The enemy was not defeated. The winter was not conquered. The advance turned into resistance, confidence into survival. Every man who is still standing bears on his face and body the marks of that white hell, missing. Fingers, scars, eyes that have seen too much. The silence after the storm is the sound of a shattered illusion. Russia was not traversed as a shortcut to victory. It swallowed men, machines, and certainties. And while the cold wind continues to blow across the still landscape, the stark truth remains. Many entered that winter as soldiers of an army that believed itself unstoppable. Few emerged without leaving a part of themselves buried forever in that endless white.